The state of Texas appears to be on a kind of collision course with the Biden administration, with the federal government over the southern border. Can it be protected, or must the invasion continue? The Supreme Court has weighed in on this to some limited extent, but it hasn't solved the problem or answered the question. So what happens now? Things are moving very quickly, and it seemed like there was no one better to tell us what the future may hold than the Attorney General of the state in question, Ken Paxton, who joins us now. Mr. Attorney General, thank you so much for coming on. So that's the question. Where does this go? It seems like there are two large forces speeding toward each other. No one's swerving. What happens, do you think?
I don't think anybody knows exactly what happened, because we're in uncharted territory where we have a federal government that has largely not just ignored federal law, not just ignored their constitutional role to protect the state and the country. They're actually participating with the cartels and bringing people here as fast as they possibly can. I just don't think we've ever seen anything like this in our country, where we have a federal government not doing their job, but affirmatively working with bad people to do bad things to the country. I don't remember anything like this.
So can I just ask you to stop there? Since you're you're the chief law enforcement officer of your state, can you assess whether what the Biden administration is doing now is, strictly speaking, criminal? Are they breaking the law in how they're handling the border?
I think they are. I mean, they're taking federal law and dismantling it. He has a constitutional duty to implement what has been put in place by the elected representatireally.
Yes.
And he's just not doing that. And he's making up his own rules as we go that allow the cartels to gain a foothold, a really strong foothold in the United States, not just in my state, but really across they're building a network across the country so that they can keep doing this well after Biden's gone.
So just to the next few days or weeks or months or who knows, the Biden administration has effectively threatened your state and said you've got 24 hours to do something. What are they demanding that you do, and where does this go short term, do you think?
I'm not exactly sure what we're supposed to do. I mean, is it we're supposed to let them help them cut down wire and fences? We weren't ordered to do that by anybody that I know of, and so we have no obligation to help them violate federal law, and we're not going to do it. And I don't think Abbott's going to give in. I certainly don't plan on giving in. So they're pushing us to help them, and we're not going to help them violate federal law. We're going to try to defend our border the best we can with the resources we have. And, my job is to do it in court. Abbott has other resources at his disposal, and I hope he uses every single one of them to stop this.
The governor, Greg Abbott, told us this morning from India that there are at least 10 states that have sent National Guard to Texas. Has something like this ever happened in the last, say, 100 years that you're aware of?
I know that they've sent different states. I know Ron DeSantis has sent troops, and I believe Ducey, when he was in office, sent troops. But nothing to this scale. Nothing since the Civil War that I know such a conflict has existed between the federal government and the states. This is really new territory for us. I think it's new territory for anybody living, because we have not seen this type of conflict between the federal government basically ignoring all of their duties. And I can't even imagine actually Texas, when it came into the Union, agreeing to come into the Union if they knew that the federal government wasn't going to defend the border. That would have never happened. I'm not sure there would have ever been a constitution that was joined by states if they ever thought that the federal government wasn't going to defend them. And if they didn't, they couldn't do anything. The states couldn't do anything about it. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. They did never imagine that a dictator president would decide to change the population to win elections forever. I don't think that even entered their minds. So what would happen if Biden decides to, quote, federalize the National Guard of Texas?
Look, he can do that. Any president can do that. I think that pretty much ends his election possibilities. Not that they're that good now anyway, but this is becoming the number one issue. When you come into a state like Texas, that I think people can clearly see, we're just trying to protect ourselves from crime and terrorism and a lot of bad consequences. I don't think now these liberal sanctuary cities know the same problem. They've got just a little bit of what we have, and they know that this is real. So I think it's becoming more, Americans are becoming more aware, and I think if Joe Biden decides to force that onto us by taking over the National Guard, I think it's an automatic loss. He's done. And so, in some ways, we have to suffer with the consequences for a few months if he does that, which I still hope he doesn't. But in the end, he loses the election absolutely if he does that.
Do you think it's possible that he will? I mean, I guess it's possible to know, but what would you rate the likelihood?
I don't know. I mean, I don't really think Biden's thinking about this much. I think it's his handlers, whoever's behind the scenes making those decisions. If I knew who that was, I could probably better give you an answer. But, I have no idea what he'll do because I don't think he knows what he's going to do. And after he's done, I'm not sure he even would recognize what he did. So if I knew who was making that decision, I could actually direct questions at him, or somebody could. I think that would be helpful. But we don't know who's running the country right now.
Yeah, no, I don't. I've never met someone who could answer conclusively who's in charge of the United States. Obviously, it's not him. So, what does Texas, in the meantime, plan to do to secure the border on behalf of the whole country? By the way, not just your state, but all of us. What are you going to do?
Yeah, we're fighting for our lives. We have several lawsuits. This one comes back to the Fifth Circuit. So we're back in court on this very issue of them cutting down our wire. So it's not over, and I'm still hopeful that somewhere along the way the Supreme Court will figure this out and realize the damage that they're creating for the states and the conflict that they're allowing between the federal government and the states that they should just not do. They should require that if there's federal law and there's a constitution, that it be enforced. So, but we have other cases that we're dealing with. We've got the Shelby Park case where we've taken control of that park. And I think the governor's just going to hold on to it. And I think we also have this March 5th date looming where we've already been sued by the federal government, by the ACLU, because the state has passed laws that go into effect in March where we can deport people that are here illegally. And we're going to do it. So we've got a lot of conflict ahead. We got the Bowie's case, which is also up at the Fifth Circuit, which will be heard by the entire court, I think, in the coming months. So there's numerous cases where the courts still have a chance to actually force the president to follow the Constitution and protect the American people.
This is uncomfortable. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to, because it's not about you. It's about someone you work with. But for 3 years, the governor of Texas hasn't done a lot to protect the country from illegal immigration, I would argue. Very frustrating to watch. All of a sudden, he's taken center stage, and he seems pretty resolved, pretty resolute on this question. Is it your sense that this is a genuine change of heart?
It sure looks like it. I mean, I think just the numerous incidences that we've tried to stop this legally, and they just keep changing up what they do. So we'll win, or we'll get some version of winning, and then they come back and try something else. So I think he has become ultimately frustrated with this, and once he's resolute, I don't think he's backing down. I think he will fight this to the bitter end. And he realizes the consequences of us not doing that is we're going to lose American lives. We've got kids dying from fentanyl overdoses. We know that we've got people crossing the border that are terrorists, and we're not catching them. And we know that we're going to be dealing with the cost of this for decades. And it's insurmountable if we let this continue. Yeah.
So you mentioned a moment ago the cartels and their role in this. Can you expand on that? And I'm not sure most Americans understand the hold that drug and human trafficking cartels from Latin America now have in the U.S. What do you know about that?
I know that they have become significantly more powerful during the Biden administration because the money that they're making has massively increased from the time that Trump was in office, because Trump was doing things like enforcing federal law that actually worked. And a lot of people say we need to fix our immigration system. Well, maybe we do, but we certainly need to enforce the laws we have. We know that it works because Trump did it. Since that time, the cartels have worked with the Chinese in importing fentanyl. We've lost thousands and thousands of kids and over 100,000 Americans to fentanyl overdoses, and they had no idea that they were taking fentanyl. And so the challenge that we have in front of us is we have the cartels making $10,000 to $12,000 a person. So the more people they bring into the country, the more money they make, and the more they're able to build their network. And they're not going to want to give this up when they're making billions of dollars on drugs, human trafficking, sex trafficking, other crimes, and importing people. I think it's going to, as they gain power and they gain more assets, that network is getting built out during Biden's administration, and the next president, hopefully Trump, is going to get stuck with dealing with that.
So you're the Attorney General of one state out of 50. Merrick Garland's the Attorney General of all 50 states. If you know this, he must know this. Why has Merrick Garland, apart from the obvious answer, he hates America, but why hasn't he done anything about this?
So I think this is this is clearly a plan, right? This is a strategy. It's just like their election strategies. This is a strategy that started on day one when Joe Biden said, we're not going to deport anybody. And of course, he brought people in like Merrick Garland who were fine with not enforcing federal law, who didn't care if the Constitution was honored by the president or him. And so their goal is simple. I think it's two things. They want more votes, and this is a way of getting them here. And then they'll want to give amnesty. And they are bringing them mostly to Republican states. And they also want to hurt Republican states, I believe, because there are costs associated with this. And right now in America, people are voting with their feet. They're leaving California, Illinois, New York, and they're going to Florida, and they're going to Texas, and they're going to Tennessee. They're going to Republican states because it's a better life, and they don't have to deal with the higher taxes and the regulations, and they're going to have a better life for their families. And so the Democrats realize this. Biden and his team realize this. So part of the way of dealing with that is, well, let's just hurt Republican states. Let's bring more crime for them to deal with, so it's less likely that people want to go there. Let's bring in more costs, so they have to have higher taxes to pay for all this illegal immigration that they didn't ask for, but the federal government brought to them. So I think it's a twofold strategy. Harm the Republican states, do as much damage, and if it means some kids die or some people die, they are willing to trade that to get the votes and the damage to Republican states. And people would say, how cynical, but I'm looking at what they're doing, not what they're saying.
In the 1980s, when I lived there, California was the richest state, the least corrupt state, had the best schools, the best roads. And now, of course, it's the most corrupt state, one-party state, and it's unlivable. And immigration did that. No other thing did that, just immigration. So why wouldn't that happen in Texas, which has been their goal from the beginning anyway?
It's going to happen. It's going to happen all over the country, particularly in Republican states, because that's where they're bringing most of the illegals. That is the strategy. Fill up the Republican states to deal with the problems, the crime, the costs, and then also, hey, there'll be more voters. They'll have kids. Those people will vote, and they presume that those votes will go their way. And that's the strategy, because if you turn Texas and a few other states Democrat, we effectively are California. We have a one-party system where there's not accountability, there's not competition, there's not a way for the voters to change things if the system is rigged so that only one party is in power. And that is ultimately the strategy of the Democratic Party. Create one party where the voters don't have a choice.
So I think what you're saying is factually supported. I mean this with respect. I think it's very obvious. Why is this so clear to you and not at all clear to, say, 95% of Republican senators in Washington?
You know, that's a good question. It seems so obvious to me. I don't know why it wouldn't be obvious to most of our leadership, but it's true even in Texas. You know, we have a Texas House that is cooperating with the Biden administration to do a lot of bad things, including trying to impeach me. And I don't understand that either, but they're willing individually to, at least in the Texas House, sell out for power, for their own personal power, for their own personal benefit, instead of doing things like protect the state on election integrity or the border or participate in things that really matter to our voters. They're listening to the House Democrats who are directed by the Biden administration. And of course, our speaker ends up being elected by House Democrats. So there's a lot of infiltration. The Democrats have infiltrated the Republican Party, and they've been very smart about it. And even though we're a majority state of Republicans, they control the Texas House. And so I don't know if that's what's going on in Washington, because I don't have as much time to pay attention to it. But it's very clear, and it should be very obvious to every American, let alone every Republican, that we are moving towards a one-party system, and that is the goal.
Is that the same Speaker of the House in Texas who was videotaped drunk in the House?
Yeah, he's running for re-election. He's got a really great opponent, David Covey, and hopefully that guy will beat him. We're also running a lot of challengers against some of these very bad Republicans, and we're hopeful that we'll have a lot of wins, enough wins that Dade Phelan won't be Speaker, and we can hopefully have a Republican Speaker elected by Republicans and not Democrats. That's where we're trying to go.
Someone who's
and
not
unfortunately, for the last 15 years, the Democrats have that guy, you saw him. I mean, it's clear where his priorities are. They're out of control. Yeah, it's like a frat house down there,
and not in a fun way. Last question. I'm in Texas a lot. I have a lot of family who live there, and people I know who are in Texas every day say that it's very obvious, just from living there, driving around there, that this invasion has degraded the quality of life in the state. Do you feel that?
Yeah. I mean, you feel it especially in the large cities, but it depends. You can find other little cities that were overrun as well. But like, in Austin, I have to be there a lot. I live in more of the Dallas area, but in Austin, for sure, you see the crime, the fact that I don't really want to be downtown like I used to. I used to be downtown all the time because that's where the capital is. And I find myself not feeling as safe because I know the crime rates are higher. And part of that is this huge problem with illegal immigration. That's true in, I think, a lot of our major cities here. And it's going to get worse. And my even bigger fear is this whole thing with these terrorist cells that I believe they're being established now because we aren't controlling the border.
I mean, the schools and hospitals of Texas are paid for by American citizens, Texans, for their benefit. How could they possibly handle an influx of people this large? Like, what's it like to go to the emergency room in San Angelo right now or San Antonio? What's that like?
I think especially a lot of these smaller hospitals are going out of business. They just can't afford the Medicaid costs that they're incurring as a result of this illegal immigration problem. And I think you're going to see more hospitals go out of business. I mean, you saw what happened in New York. They were clearing out of school so that illegals could come to school, and the kids that are from there can't even go. That's going to be more and more of a problem as these numbers continue to increase. We're going to all feel it, and it's just a matter of time before the entire nation directly feels this, and that's going to continue to grow.
Yeah. Well, there needs to be some very vigorous response to that because that's the destruction of our nation. So I appreciate Ken Paxton, Attorney General of Texas. Thank you for the time and for that explanation.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you. There's not one power center in this country, the media, the government at all levels and both parties, big business. There's not one power center in the United States that would like to see secure borders. And so, of course, we haven't had secure borders, and now we're being invaded, and no one's really doing anything about it. So it's just a matter of time before citizens who love their country, in many cases who have served their country overseas, decided to get a little more active in protecting their country. And that's why we're about to see the Take Our Border Back convoy. It begins on January 29th. Truckers, bikers, anyone who wants to come and protect the United States and demand that our government secure our southern border is welcome. They'll be driving to Texas, and one of the people who will help them navigate that state is Doc Pete Chambers. Chambers is, true to his title, a physician. He's a former Green Beret. He was recently down in Eagle Pass, Texas, and here's part of what he saw.
Doc Chambers from Eagle Pass, Texas. Today's the 18th of December. We're out here at the point of entry. 5,000 are sitting on the ground right now. It's increasing as we go along. Information that we've received says another 7,000 should be processed through this particular point by morning. Joe and I have been here many times. Last time we were down here, we were in uniform, and now I'm a civilian and in the Army of God. So we'll keep telling truths, and you need to get this video to your legislators and tell them, in the state of Texas particularly, this is out of control.
So not surprisingly, Doc Pete Chambers has been attacked by dying legacy media outlets as a deeply scary person, because your country being invaded is not scary. It's all totally normal. We thought it would be worth talking to Doc Pete Chambers about what he expects to happen with this convoy and his role in it. He joins us now. Dr. Chambers, thank you so much for coming on.
It's great to be here, Tucker.
So what can we expect with this convoy? Can you describe what it is and what its purpose is?
Right. This is a peaceful assembly. This is what we do as Americans. This is how we shed light to a subject. This shedding of the light will result in exposing really what an open border policy looks like.
Yes.
We know we know the problem sets in Texas, but literally I promise you this, that 40 miles north of that border, there will be people that will never have heard of the border problem because they just watch mainstream media.
Yes.
And so this is what that is about. And
so can you tell us the route of the convoy and who you expect to join it?
Right. So right now they're going to be leaving out of, on the 29th, Virginia Beach, which is where the 1607 Covenant, the landing, which signified the John Smith landing in 1607, where they
Yes.
planted a cross on the beach and said, "Hey, this is a covenant to this nation, to God." And then they're going to leave from there, and they're going to go down through Florida. They're going to cut across Highway 10 through Louisiana, Baton Rouge, Houston, into Dripping Springs, Texas, where I'll be working out of, and then on to near Eagle Pass. Now, I'm part of the advisory of this, and as I advised, I used to be in that same unit that's down there. That's the unit that has a streamer on it from the Alamo. It's a very historic Texas unit. And so they are down there holding the line. And I know those soldiers. I worked with them. I took care of them as a doctor with Operation Lone Star. They're busy. So the convoy is going to go just a little bit just a little bit to the north, really, in an area about 30 miles away in Quemado, Texas, to a children's camp. A beautiful lady down there who has taken care of orphans and widows. You can't write this stuff in a book. I couldn't make this up. But she was overrun, first of all, by the COVID mandates that said you got to shut down. You can't keep running this shelter, number one. Number two, she was overrun by the numbers of volumes of illegals that were coming through her neighborhood, trying to get into her food pantry. And then number three, the cartels are a significant presence in that area because that is the end point of where they do the end around. So we are looking at the bright, shiny object that is Eagle Pass. That's a bright, shiny object. Look here. The droids that you're not looking for, if you will, are just to the north, right in that location. And so what this is going to do is it's going to bring light to it, because we have to understand that there is a constitution, both state and federal, and that we have to, number one, expose those that argue things in the Hegelian dialectics, if you will, of tort law, and look at the Constitution, which is exactly what this is a focus on. The Constitution, we the people. That's why we the people will be riding along, mama bears, cops, veterans, truckers, and going to that location to bring light. There is nothing nefarious about this. There is, matter of fact, I am suggesting to them that they, and they know this, that this is a peaceful demonstration. This is how this will be.
Who's paying for this? I assume George Soros is not. The private equity oligarchs and the hedge fund managers probably not sending cash to finance this whole thing. Is it self-financed?
This is self-financed. This is give, send, go. If you go to the takeourborderback.com website, there's a way to find that. But this is unlike what I saw on the border, and I can tell you who all the actors are with that, and there would be a longer discussion where that money comes from. Perhaps we should go to Mexico first and drive across the border at the point of entry and just say, hey, we need one of those bags of cash that you're giving out to the illegal folks.
Who's giving those bags of cash out, do you think?
That is, well, it's many different ways, but sometimes through charities when they do get to the U.S. side. Sometimes UNESCO, a UN organization under the IOM, who is going to hand them a card, really, it's a debit card, with a phone, and that is funded illegally through the United States back channels into UNESCO. And that money's been tracked, and we know about this. We have the receipts on it, and it'll just take time to keep elucidating those that aren't listening in D.C. I'm
a little confused, though. I mean, if you commit an armed robbery and I drive you from the liquor store to my house and put you up for the night, I'm an accessory to your crime and I can be arrested. If there are UN officials abetting crimes against the United States, why aren't they in prison? Why aren't they arrested immediately?
Exactly. And if there are people that have taken an oath to the Constitution who are also in that line of decision-making processes, the U.S. Constitution says this, and this is why I know that everyone in the government should agree with me. The same oath that I took, they took. If they don't follow that, they're either aiding or abetting, they are treasonous, or they are it is dereliction of duty. So yeah, there's a lot of things that should be accountable, and that is one of the things that is that we're seeking. Is you got to shed light on it to get the accountability.
I'm really struck as I watch massive protests in Europe against the carbon tyranny by farmers, for example, in Germany, that we don't have anything like that here. We haven't had a large-scale protest against the people in charge since January 6th, over 3 years ago. And that, of course, was the point of persecuting the innocent that day, was to stop future protests, and it's worked. Are you concerned that this protest is ripe for subversion by the intel agencies, by the Biden administration, and that you'll be persecuted in the way that the January 6th protesters were?
I'm not concerned in a sense for personal concern, but I'm concerned that that a bad light would be shed prior to it already has, and that's okay. That people have a right for that. We fought for that, but it's not okay to disparage something that is that has a really peaceful intent. But understand this, that because of comfort in this country, sometimes people don't stand up for what they believe is right, and that's a sin of omission. That's just as bad as being a perpetrator to me, in my personal opinion. So when I took off my uniform and left, and I say this, I'm in the army of God. There is no club. I think that they're trying to think there's an army of God who, they're going through the books right now trying to figure out where are these guys at. This is just a figurative speech because I don't worry about what man thinks about me. I adhere to the law and I take care of those that are oppressed. That's what a Green Beret does. And I didn't take off the uniform and just say, well, now I'm just going to go, willy-nilly. Didn't change my character. So yeah, I'm not worried about what those people think. Let me explain a little story. This is an interesting one. You're going to like this. In Del Rio, Texas, about a year and a half ago, 17,000 Haitians showed up at that bridge. I don't know if you remember them under the bridge, and they were corralling them under. We were right. So I was in the chopper when we showed up. Got on the ground. 50 National Guards, probably about 25 DPS guys, troopers, and maybe about 15, 20 the Custom Border Patrol. Now, my dog and myself held them off for about 12 hours on the border, just barking, right? Because we're getting overwhelmed. But at some point, they had to say, all right, we got to let them in. They're just coming across. That was the same time that horse whipping thing, he had the split reins. It looked like he was whipping. He wasn't. He was 400 meters away from me. That just was a camera shot. But here's what happens. Now we set it up. We got things under control. We're in an operations tent. And here comes the FBI, and they come busting in, and I'll never forget it. Lady comes in wearing a Hillary Clinton pantsuit and says, "Hey, there's a white supremacist group out here, and they're on the list." And I said, "Well, who are they?" And she said, "This particular organization." Don't remember. They were there providing sandwiches to us guys that were out there working all night and all day, and they were actually a Hispanic group from McAllen. So sometimes they might be a little wrong, but I think that the danger in this is those media sources that are actively provoking to do what's a globalist agenda to separate Americans, does that. They act on it because it's a story, right? But they take the story, instead of doing their own homework, they take that and come in and try to set the narrative with those of us on the tactical level, on the ground. And we just laughed at her and said, okay, thanks. Here's the flyer. Yeah. God, go get a sandwich from one of the supremacists.
To the liberal white lady mind, everyone they disagree with is a white supremacist. Just interested, whatever happened to those 17,000 Haitians who stormed our country illegally?
Great question.
Are they back in Haiti?
Well, Senor Mayorkas, he said that was going to happen, and that's not what happened because we followed the tail numbers. The planes went to, some of them flew out of Laughlin Air Force Base, which is a United States Air Force Base close to Del Rio. Some of them got on buses. The first or second bus that lit out of Del Rio, they overtook the bus driver and disappeared into the periphery of Texas. And then
what do you mean they overtook the bus driver?
They used force and stopped the bus driver and got off the bus and took off.
Then why aren't they in prison? I mean, what is this? I'm sorry to interrupt your story. That's nuts.
No. This is our life down here. This is what we see. It's ridiculousness. So for me, I'm not surprised by any of this. Particularly that night, that video that you played, that was 18 December. That ended up being about 12,500. But the rest of the story, about 3,000 of them went to the Civic Center in San Antonio, and that ended up being a job fair for the cartel. So we followed them, we as citizens, and figured out what they were doing was the cartel guys would drive up, and then it was like a hiring frenzy, like something on LinkedIn, but it was there in the Civic Center. And so we are aiding and abetting an invasion on not only on the border, but every state is a border state at this point.
It's hard to comprehend that no one's done anything about this for 3 years, and it'll be a completely different country in a decade because of this, and not a better one. Let me ask, you often hear this migrant wave described as, quote, military-age males. You spent a lot of time there. Mm-hmm. What percentage would you say are military-age males?
That has changed. It predominantly was family units when I was down there a year ago. Yep. The 22nd of May was my last day in uniform last year. Now it is about 60%, and I'll just give you the numbers from that particular night on December the 18th. About 60% male. This particular group was primarily out of Venezuela, but when I get information that comes up to the border, because we have people all the way down into the Darien Gap that report to us, these are just citizens, former military guys, and they tell us what's going on. The next wave is going to be Yemenis. Think about this. They're bombing Yemen right now. The next thing you do is get displaced persons, just like they did in Hadalat Rukban camps in the Syrian-Jordan border. But Jordan sent them up through Europe. These are coming straight to the Darien Gap and coming to us. So, yes, there are more fighting age males now per capita because of the fact that, my opinion, most dangerous course of action, most likely, this is the spectrum. I have to think about the most dangerous, and it's to just destabilize this country. This is a Marxist technique. This could be mixed in with a little bit of Cloward-Piven doctrine. This could be mixed in with a little bit of Saul Alinsky to create a need for us to have the government save us. We're from the government. We're here to help you. All right. Well, no, because your tweet that you asked out there, I'm going to quote it. Where are the Texans? I'm sitting there screaming, we're right here, and come and get on a horse and we'll show you. But we, the people, are going to expose these things because we have to. This is our backyard. And there's nothing humanitarian about this. But we have to make sure that our legislators understand, because I've lost a lot of faith. I still have faith in a few. They have to understand that they have to adhere to that same oath. And many of them don't have an oath. And we've done some FOIAs and found that out as well. It's pretty interesting in the Biden administrations, particularly.
So I think most people, and I'm sure you're in this group, would like to live in a country where the government that they hire and pay for solves these problems, like securing the nation against invasion. But they're not, and so citizens are stepping into the breach. Do you have any hope that Governor Greg Abbott of Texas will change his longstanding policy of supporting open borders and really crack down? Do you think it's real?
You know, since I've been on the border, I've done numerous talks on the optics and the reality of Operation Lone Star since I got out, because I had to start telling the truth, because I just couldn't stand that what we were doing was 90% optics and 10% reality in stopping anything. We counted a lot of heads, and we apprehended, if you will, the numbers on a piece of paper. So now there is a constitutionally written document that came out the 24th, not 2 days ago, that is constitutionally driven. I love it. But we have to look at the way that they were arguing in court. And this is where I want, the citizens to do their part, is to talk to A.G. Paxton, who I admire and I've had discussion with, and say, you can't use tort law in the Fifth Circuit amicus brief exactly. If you look at the references, they didn't use the Constitution. They used tort law, case law. And that's never going to fly, because the job of the federal government is to provide security for this nation, period. Once again, I said, we agree that the oath is an oath. So if you agree on that, then you're going to be guilty of treason if you know that this is an invasion. It is. I mean, how many deaths of Americans, sometimes, and this is going to be ugly, but hacked to death. We've heard of stories that raped by illegals coming in, doing this. How many warrants this invasion? I mean, at what point do we say this is enough?
Really kind of amazing. Last question for you, Dr. Chambers, is your expectation that this will proceed peacefully, and will it end here? I mean, if Abbott, who clearly has been committed to open borders in effect, if not in word, if he doesn't secure the Texas border, like what happens next?
Well, there has to be some teeth in this declaration of emergency. He hasn't declared an emergency border invasion. That has to be. We have to declare the cartels actually terrorist organizations, foreign terrorist organizations, transnational criminals, and then we have to go after that. Because until we do that, there's no teeth in this. There's none right now. It'll be us standing the line, protecting our individual properties, which we have a right to. But it's not how it be. As far as the convoy, it's going to go over fine, and there's going to be those naysayers. I'm not worried about that. We don't put our worries in that.
Yeah. Well, I hope they don't infiltrate it like they did January 6th and make you look like terrorists.
They may.
So Godspeed. Mm-hmm. Dr. Pete Chambers, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Free speech is bigger than any one person or any one organization. Societies are defined by what they will not permit. What we're watching is the total inversion of virtue. Welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. A lot has been written about the corruption of politicians. You've seen that before. But really not enough has been said about how unbelievably boring they are in person. That's the main thing you notice when you have dinner with them. Their main interest is themselves. That's what they talk about. It's all they can talk about. And it's very tedious. Narcissism always is tedious. And so one of the great and happy and unexpected surprises of this cycle is how many interesting people are running around the country. People with something to say that isn't necessarily about them. People who have interest beyond just accumulating more power. J.D. Vance in Ohio, Kari Lake and Blake Masters in Arizona, Joe Kent in Washington State, Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania. None of these people has been in politics before. All of them seem to be listening to voters, listening, not just talking. And amazingly, all of them could win on November 8th. And if they do, that's a huge problem for the Democratic Party and for the people in charge more broadly. It's a potential disaster. It's one thing to elect more Mitch McConnells, tame Republicans who know what the rules are. The first rule, of course, is you must lose. People like that will play along as they faithfully have for decades. But what would happen if someone like Blake Masters or J.D. Vance wound up in the U.S. Senate? That would be disruptive. These are not people who care about secret partisan arrangements or even about partisan affiliation. They might actually try to change the country for the better. So if you're benefiting from the current disaster, that's a scary prospect. But no one running for office right now is quite as scary to people like that as Kari Lake. She's running for governor of Arizona. Lake may be the most skillful communicator in American politics right now. But most terrifying of all, she spent 30 years in television news. So when Kari Lake says the media are corrupt, she's not guessing. She lived right in the middle of it for decades. This is a deeply unsettling message for Democrats to hear because it strikes at the heart of their power. Without the complicity of the media, there is no chance neoliberal Democrats could get elected to office. Not one of them, ever. They've got nothing to offer you. It's not like they're improving the country if you looked around. No. They need the media. The media are all they have. The liberal media, they're not just annoying, they're the key to the whole system. Take them away and everything changes. So it's essential to the people in charge that voters continue to believe that the so-called news coverage they see and read is real, that it conveys facts and not simply crude North Korea-style political propaganda. But Kari Lake knows better. She knows the truth. Again, she has seen it. And they truly hate her for revealing this secret in public. Kari Lake has spent the last year absorbing the cruelest and most outrageous possible attacks from her former colleagues in the media. They're not simply trying to defeat her in November, though of course they are. They're trying to destroy her. They're trying to make certain that no American voter ever has the chance to hear what Kari Lake is saying. Because again, once people know it's all fake, this isn't news, these are lies, and these lies are the key to keeping the people who are wrecking the country in power. Once people understand that, the game is over, it's done. So they have to stop Kari Lake. Here's a sample.
Kari Lake was the picture, the image, the definition of a threat to our democracy.
Why the threat to democracy by way of Arizona is way more dire than you may think.
Kari Lake, she has made lies about the 2020 election conspiracy theories.
Kari Lake, who has been out there spreading false conspiracies and election lies still today.
Gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake, who's been called Trump in heels and will not say whether she would accept an election loss in her own race, is an extreme anti-vaxxer.
She's an election denier. She's a conspiracy theorist.
Rising star of the right.
We have to be abundantly clear about just how radical the Kari Lakes and Blake Masters are. They're nothing like the John McCain.
She might be in a position to win the governorship in this state, and that would be a very dangerous thing, both for the state and for the country in 2024.
A threat to our society, Kari Lake.
Oh, she's an extremist. Kari Lake is extreme. Scream the people who support open borders and late-term sex-selective abortions and the castration of children. She's extreme. Unlike us, she's hurting democracy, they yell. as they promote censorship and voter fraud. She's a threat to our society. And it's not just aging lifestyle liberals on Xanax who have shows on MSNBC who are saying things like this. No, it's Republicans too. Members of the GOP establishment in both Arizona and in Washington. That would include, amazingly, former Arizona Governor Jan Brewer, who they told you was a conservative. But then, of course, they told you Liz Cheney was a conservative too. Be happy with her. She's conservative. She's on your side. Okay. Not surprisingly, Liz Cheney has come to the same conclusion about Kari Lake.
Include campaigning for Democrats if that's what it takes.
Yes.
It does. Okay, very well.
I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that Kari Lake isn't elected the governor of Arizona, a state I don't live in, she says before an audience of people in Texas who won't be governed by Kari Lake either. And they applaud. Yes, got to stop Kari Lake. She's a fascist. She's dangerous. She'll destroy our society. Why? Because she's telling the truth about the media with authority, because she knows. So that's the flavor of the media coverage Kari Lake has received. In fact, over the past year, there's not been a single objective or anything approaching an objective news story about Kari Lake in all of legacy media. Every single story has been a partisan attack because they know she's telling the truth. But here's the amazing thing, and the heartening thing, is it tells you about the waning power of the media. Kari Lake thrived anyway. She's now leading the race in Arizona. If the election is fair, she will win. So how'd she do that? Few people can do that. How'd Kari Lake do that? Well, she knows what she believes. She's not reciting her positions from a teleprompter like Joe Biden or John Fetterman. She's not brain damaged. She has real beliefs. But more than anything, Kari Lake is not afraid of the media. She's not on a leash like everyone else. She knows who they are, and she's willing to say so. She doesn't care what the New York Times thinks, because she knows what the New York Times is, because she lived in that world. Watch this clip from Tuesday of this week in which a reporter calls Kari Lake an election denier.
If you're going to start throwing around terms like election denier, let's remember who the other election deniers were: Hillary Clinton and all the Democrats. Let's talk about election deniers. Here's 150 examples of Democrats denying election results. So it's okay for Democrats to question elections, but it's not okay for Republicans. It's a crock of BS. Every one of you knows it. We have our freedom of speech, and we're not going to relinquish it to a bunch of fake news propagandists. Since 2000, people have questioned the legitimacy of our elections. And all we're asking is that in the future, we don't have that have to happen anymore.
So you watch a clip like that and you begin to connect some dots. Okay, so the media that control our perception of reality, that lie about what they tell us and don't tell us all kinds of things we probably should know about the rest of the world, for example, those media organizations are, relatively speaking, tiny. They're tiny. This is a country of 340 million people. MSNBC has like 11 people watching. So why are they so powerful? Well, they're so powerful because the people in charge take them seriously. They act like they have moral legitimacy, when of course they have no moral legitimacy of any kind. This is full North Korean propaganda. It's an offense against democracy, what they're doing. And Kari Lake knows that. And she pulls off their mask and lets them know they don't deserve our respect. Here, for example, is Kari Lake's response in June when a CNN reporter asked her for an interview. Watch this.
Hi.
Kari.
Hi.
Nice to see you. You're off in CNN.
You don't have a mask on anymore. What's going
we're
on?
outside. Do you have a minute to
well,
chat?
we're 6 feet apart.
Do you have a minute to chat?
I'll do an interview.
Okay.
As long as it airs on CNN Plus. Does that still exist?
Yeah.
I didn't think so, because the people don't like what you guys are peddling, which is propaganda. Thank you.
Where's your mask, you neurotic freak? I'll do it on CNN Plus. Oh, that failed because everyone hates you. It's so great because it's so true. All of us know it. But the people in charge, especially in the Republican Party, never admit it out loud. If the New York Times did a hit piece on Mitch McConnell, he'd be rushing around his office worried about it. The New York Times does a hit piece on Kari Lake every day, and she laughs because it doesn't matter what the New York Times thinks. They only have power because we give them power, because we treat them like they're real, but they're fake. They're ghosts. Turn on the lights and they evaporate. They go away. They don't actually exist. They're a fantasy that can only continue as long as we participate. So in attacking the media, what Kari Lake is really doing is standing up to institutional power. So, for example, Kari Lake is not afraid to improve the lives of people in Arizona by pushing back against the vaccine lunacy. Oh, she's an extreme vaccine denier. She's an anti-vaxxer, says MSNBC. She doesn't care. On Wednesday, she announced that no matter what the CDC does, Arizonans will never be forced to inject their children with an experimental vaccine that clearly hurts people. Watch.
This forced shot by the CDC, which has their tentacles in Big Pharma, and I'm going to fight that.
Imagine what she would be like on a debate stage. How'd you like to face off against her? Well, Katie Hobbs doesn't want to. She's running against Katie Hobbs. Katie Hobbs was the Secretary of State of Arizona, and she's refused to debate Kari Lake. Oh, she's an election desire. Right. Okay. So how does Katie Hobbs plan to win? Well, this week, Hobbs, who is again the Secretary of State of Arizona in charge of elections, announced that thousands of voters mistakenly received a ballot that had only federal races on it. Now, there's no proof this was deliberate, but it kind of undercuts the whole election denier attack when you send out thousands of faulty ballots a few weeks before the election. So as we said, assuming that all votes are counted, and we should never take that on faith, we should never take that on faith. If this is a democracy, we have an absolute right to have it proven to us that the election was fair. If it is fair, Kari Lake's going to win. She's leading in pretty much every poll. So you kind of have to wonder, if there's a person running for governor of Arizona with every person against her with institutional power, and she's going to win anyway, then maybe she's doing something other Republicans should learn about. And so we have invited, and we're grateful that she accepted, Kari Lake on the show tonight to pass on a little advice to other candidates. Kari Lake, thank you so much for coming on. So you were so attacked and reviled that news channels who might be sympathetic to you or people who might be sympathetic to you didn't even bother to talk to you because, like, there's no chance you could win. Now you are winning. That's an amazing achievement. What advice would you give to other candidates?
Oh my gosh, fight back. I mean, you know, here's the beautiful thing, Tucker. People really aren't watching a lot of these news channels. And right. I know it because I used to be privy to some of the ratings of the local news. And so they show up, and 90% of them are liberal leftists. And probably of that 90%, 89, well, maybe 100% of them aren't that smart. And they think they're so powerful. And I just decided to start bringing a camera and a microphone and turning the camera on them. You know, here's how it goes. They throw you a question. It's loaded with a whole bunch of garbage. There's obviously an agenda in their question and a soliloquy, and then they get you to answer it, but they cut their part out so they don't look like a fool. Well, we decided to start putting their part right out on the internet and showing people what the media is up to. And they've been lying and doing hit pieces about me. I've been on the campaign trail for 506 days, but who's counting? And they've been lying almost the entire time. But the people just aren't buying it anymore. I mean, they're tuning in to people like you. You've got the ratings. The CNNs of the world don't have the ratings anymore, and they're losing their power. And if they're lying about me every single night, imagine what else they're lying about when it comes to happenings in the world. It's really, it's really sad and sick.
It's terrifying because they do have so much power because both parties take them seriously. So you left a good job in which you were succeeding. You spent your life in television, and you decided to leave that and run for governor with no political experience in your background. Just sum up, what an interesting decision. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, because I really recognized that the media was becoming all propaganda, and I didn't want to lend my soul, my spirit, my brain, my mind to any of that. And the people then, when I resigned, asked me to run for office. And let's face it, the Republican Party has the ideas that work. We've got the common sense ideas. And the Republicans have been running from that rather than going out and showing people that we have the good ideas. We don't have to allow the left and the liberals in the media to dictate what we're talking about. We need to dictate what we're talking about. We have the better ideas. We're on the right side of things.
I mean, they call you an extremist. I can't imagine a more moderate and sensible message than the one that you're delivering. And I hope that people study your campaign no matter what happens, because you somehow get that message out through the filter. And I just think it's an amazing achievement. So, Kari Lake, thank you for coming on tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker. Thank you.
So one thing the American media don't cover very much is what's happening in other countries. Maybe there are too many lessons for the rest of us. So the Prime Minister of the UK just resigned after just a few weeks in office. What was that about? Piers Morgan is from that country and joins us next to assess. Tim Ryan is the emasculated lifestyle liberal who's posing as a working man as he runs for Senate in Ohio. He's accused his opponent, J.D. Vance, of peddling conspiracy theories. Okay, conspiracy theories. Like, what, the last election was unfair? It's a conspiracy theory. So we thought we'd take a look at some of Congressman Ryan's theories. The Washington Free Beacon's Joe Simonson did the work for us. He just unearthed this footage. It's from Tim Ryan's first congressional campaign. Now, in this clip, you don't hear this very often in Washington, Ryan promises to investigate the idea, which he takes very seriously, that the U.S. government created AIDS to murder black people. Watch this.
Dr. Boyd Gray.
By the way, it's not only, we're open to any possibility. We believe in UFOs. So if there's evidence of it, of course, we'll follow up on it. There doesn't seem to be any evidence of it, though. And claims like that make people really hate each other on racial grounds in this country. So a responsible person would have said, no, I don't actually think that's true. But he did not say that because he'll say anything because all he wants is power. So the Free Beacon followed up with Tim Ryan's office to find out, have you gotten the probe underway? The genocide? But they didn't get a response. But this wasn't the only brilliant idea that Tim Ryan has had. Breitbart reports tonight that when he ran for president in 2019, remember that? Tim Ryan pledged to free 1 million inmates from across the country, just let them out of prison. Presumably, if he wins election in November, which thank God he's not going to, he would try that in the U.S. Senate. So people are getting a little sick of politicians who will say anything like Tim Ryan. And that's not just in this country. In the UK, Prime Minister Liz Truss just resigned. She is now officially Great Britain's shortest-serving prime minister. What is this about? Well, Piers Morgan had her number early. He's the host of Piers Morgan Uncensored on Fox Nation, and we thought he would be able to explain what is this all about to us tonight. Piers, thanks so much for coming on. No, I know since I talked to you yesterday on unrelated matters that you were very mad at Liz Truss, but I don't understand the nuances. Why was she so bad?
Well, I thought from the start that she was utterly useless, and she's now turned out to be indeed utterly useless, mainly because, and this might sound familiar to you, Tucker, about what's been going on in America. She made extremely grandiose promises and pledges about fixing the economy, about unifying the country, about she was going to fix everything that was wrong with Britain. And of course, within about 3 weeks, she launched a series of measures, unfunded, slashing taxes everywhere, which is great if you can fund it. She couldn't. The markets reacted horrifically. The pound had a run on it against the dollar, almost leading to parity. Interest rates rocketed. And it was very quickly clear she didn't know what she was doing. So then she did what all weak leaders did. She threw her treasurer, her chancellor, under the bus and fired him to try and save her own skin. That didn't work. And then she got the visit from the men in grey suits, the undertakers we call them, who slide in the back door of number 10 Downing Street today to say the game was up and it was all over. 44 days, Tucker, and she's gone. This was a British Prime Minister, the shortest tenure in the history of my country. Now, on one level, it's very embarrassing, shameful actually. What she did was play a reckless casino politics with the nation's finances, and the result will be that millions of people in Britain will have much higher mortgages, and that's going to be very painful for them. So there was real cost and pain to what she did. But there is a lesson, isn't there? The one good thing about this is, once we realised she was indeed utterly hopeless, we were able to get rid of her very quickly. You guys, you're stuck with old Joe Biden for years more. And of course, he's been making the same promises about the economy, same promises about unifying the country, all this stuff. We have a very flawed political system in many ways in our country, but the way we are ruthless with bad leaders is actually, I think, quite an impressive feat.
Well, I couldn't agree more. So we think of the British economy as ever enduring, one of the most stable in the world. It sounds suddenly like it's not very stable.
Yeah, listen, it just shows you what can happen if you play roulette with the markets, if you do stuff which just doesn't make sense. And I said this when she did her big mini budget after 3 weeks in office. And I thought, wow, this just doesn't make any sense. She's not funding any of it. She's giving us all these tax cuts. Where's the money coming from during a financial crisis, during a massive cost of living crisis? She kept saying it was about growth, growth, growth. In fact, tens of billions of loss later, literally, in a week, we realized it was the complete opposite, and we were able to act. I mean, it was so bad, Tucker, that The Economist, which is quite a serious economic magazine, did a profile of her about 10 days ago in which they compared her to an iceberg, a lettuce. And they said that she basically, if you took out the Queen's death and the 10-day period of mourning, she had basically lasted about the shelf life of a lettuce. And the Daily Star newspaper in Britain then did a live stream of an actual lettuce 7 days ago just to see what would happen and would it outlast Liz Truss. And today, the lettuce was declared the victor. The lettuce outlived Liz Truss. And if that doesn't sum up what a ridiculous farce this has been, I don't know what does. But it's been a pretty awful episode for Britain, very embarrassing. It has shattered our reputation, as you say, for economic competence. And now we're facing an extraordinary situation where Boris Johnson, who was, as you may remember, fired from office 3 months ago by his own party turning on him, is now one of the favourites to make a dramatic return and become Prime Minister again. And that, I think, for many people, will be the day that we decide to get on a plane and come to America permanently for the calmness and the solidity of your presidential system.
Well, you're always welcome here. Piers Morgan, great to see you tonight. Thank you. So a couple of years back, at the very pinnacle of the craziness, a city councilwoman in Seattle voted to defund the police. She called them murderers and racists. But she doesn't want to defund the police who protect her. She actually wants the police to protect her. She's demanding it for the second time. Our Northwest crime correspondent Jason Rance joins us with an exclusive report on this. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Tucker. Socialist Seattle City Councilman Shama Sawant says she is the victim of a drive-by poop thrower. She says a man has thrown a bag of human waste at her home 6 times this month, and she's now demanding that the Seattle Police Department not only prioritize the investigation, but post officers outside of her home for protection. Now, just for context, the SPD lost nearly 500 officers since her defunding campaign, and it's gotten so bad we've gone weeks without investigating sex crimes because we didn't have enough staff. So a nonviolent poop thrower is obviously not a high priority. But how's this for bizarre? She's criticizing the cops for not sending the human waste to a lab for forensic testing. And she noted in a press release, quote, "That seems quite odd considering that hospital labs do tests on human fecal matter all the time. I'm not entirely sure what she thinks she's going to actually get from the fecal testing. Ma'am, we've narrowed down the suspect to someone who has irritable bowel syndrome." I'm not sure what she expects. So in this open letter that she wrote to the police chiefs, she said, quote, "As a socialist city council member who has participated in BLM protests, I'm being told that my case of 6 threatening incidents involving human excrement doesn't merit even a serious investigation, let alone protection." Yes, that's exactly what she's being told. This is not the first time the police defunder has asked for special treatment. She's made the same demands last year after receiving threatening emails. Now, police tell me this is an open investigation. I should know, Tucker, if police do end up making an arrest, thanks to the criminal justice reforms that Sawant backs, it's not a bookable offense. So they're not spending time in jail.
It's got to be one of the worst people I've ever heard about, ever. I could make a million bitter jokes about it. I'm not going to. Jason Rance, really appreciate your report on that.
Thanks,
Thank you. Steve Bannon was not at the Capitol building on January 6th. He didn't break any laws that day. He's not even accused of breaking any laws that day, but he was Donald Trump's chief political advisor. So today, Steve Bannon was sentenced to nearly half a year in prison by the January 6th committee. Why? Well, because in 2022, the Democratic Party puts its political opponents in jail. That's why. In a moment, Steve Bannon will join us for his first interview since the sentence was handed down. But first, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. It feels like Permanent Washington has always hated Donald Trump. But actually, that's not true. For years, Trump was considered merely a joke in D.C., a celebrity sideshow. People were happy to have him to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And that was true as late as the 2016 primaries. There were still many professional Republicans, people you wouldn't expect, people like Bill Kristol, Joe Scarborough, people who were making highly positive noises about Donald Trump. And then it changed in a moment. It changed on February 13th of that year at the Republican debate in Greenville, South Carolina. That's when Donald Trump criticized the Iraq war. Quote, "Obviously, the war in Iraq was a big fat mistake," he said. And of course, by that point, it certainly was obvious that it was a mistake. But that didn't mean you were allowed to admit it in Washington. You weren't. Thousands of lobbyists, think tank analysts, hack beltway journalists owed their salaries and their reputations to perpetuating the lie that American foreign policy was succeeding. Everything was fine. No one really believed that. The evidence was too strong on the other side, but everyone had to say it. Too many careers were at stake. And yet suddenly here was Donald Trump refusing to play along, giving away the game in public on TV. The reaction to this in D.C. was violent and immediate. Donald Trump must be stopped. If Donald Trump was willing to criticize the Iraq War as a Republican, God knows what else he might say. The Never Trump movement that resulted from that year's South Carolina debate, and that's where it began, that movement went on to do all kinds of things, including subverting the rule of law in this country, as well as entire federal agencies. But one of its first efforts was a little-remembered spoiler campaign designed to siphon votes from Trump in the general election. A group of liberals in Washington, informally headed by Bill Kristol, recruited a longtime federal bureaucrat called Evan McMullin and convinced him to run for president. McMullin didn't seem like a presidential candidate. He was 40 years old, never married, and very obviously odd, very odd. He had no trouble raising money. There were a lot of liberals happy to write him checks. The problem was voters. They were not impressed by Evan McMullin at all. By the end, he won half of 1% of the popular total and 0 electoral votes, and he was soon forgotten, except on Wikipedia. And yet, and here's the point, 6 years later, Evan McMullin has reemerged. He's running for Senate in the state of Utah against incumbent Mike Lee. And amazingly, he could win. He could actually win. Now, if McMullin does win, his vote could very well give Democrats control of the U.S. Senate. How did this happen? How is this possible, you wonder? It doesn't make sense. Utah is a conservative, highly Republican state. Evan McMullin has the same politics and worldview as Pete Buttigieg. He is a liberal Democrat. But he's not running as a liberal Democrat, and that's the key to his success this year. Evan McMullin is running instead as an independent, and many voters appear to be under the impression that he actually is independent. But he's not. That's a lie, a transparent lie. Evan McMullin is roughly as independent as Kamala Harris is. He's considerably less independent than, say, Ilhan Omar. Evan McMullin is anything but independent. He is entirely controlled and has always been. McMullin even uses the Democratic Party's fundraising platform, Act Blue. His campaign has paid nearly $2 million to Democratic Party consulting services in the last year alone. That would include Precision Strategies, co-founded by a Biden advisor. Other firms include Foundation Strategies, Blueprint Public Affairs, and KMM Strategy. These are all partisan Democratic Party firms. In politics, you pick a side in the consultants you hire. And Evan McMullin has picked his side, the Democratic side. Not surprisingly, the creepy liberals at the Lincoln Project, who lie for a living, are busy pretending that Evan McMullin is not one of them. Oh, no. Republicans, they write, Evan McMullin truly represents your values. Really? Which values are those? Does Evan McMullin oppose amnesty for illegal migrants? Does he oppose race-crazed teachers' unions? Does he oppose even Tony Fauci? No, of course not. Evan McMullin is fully on board with every anti-family scheme the Democratic Party has dreamed up over the last decade. As a supposedly faithful Mormon, he can't even acknowledge that Roe v. Wade was a bad decision. He is a neoliberal robot. There's nothing independent about him. Watch him read the Democratic Party's talking points, for example, on abortion.
I am committed to the sanctity of life, but I think that means the lives of women. That means the lives of unborn, of course, and it means the lives of children. And I think we've got to take a more comprehensive approach to that.
But just to be clear, you don't support overturning Roe v. Wade anymore as you did in 2016. I'm just trying to get clarity.
I do not think that is the way for the country to move forward on this issue.
Oh, so keeping Roe v. Wade is the way for the country to move forward. But of course, Roe v. Wade, whatever you think of it, froze everything in amber in 1973 and imposed the most radically pro-abortion regime from the courts on all 50 states. So of course, you can't move forward under Roe v. Wade in either direction. It doesn't make sense. It's effectively pro-abortion. You don't typically hear Mormons talk like that. And in fact, Evan McMullin, as you just heard suggested, did not used to talk like this. In fact, back in 2016, he denounced Donald Trump the guy who would eventually get Roe v. Wade overturned, because he said Trump wasn't pro-life enough. I'm the only pro-life candidate in the race, McMullen wrote in 2016. 4 years later, after Trump successfully appointed several pro-life justices to the Supreme Court who overturned Roe v. Wade, McMullen has clarified what he means when he says pro-life. Turns out being pro-life has nothing to do with protecting children. Here's what McMullen said, quote, "You aren't actually pro-life if you can't say Black Lives Matter." Oh, right. Black Lives Matter, which is an explicitly pro-choice organization. Are you following all this? It doesn't make any sense. He's a liberal Democrat, and it'd be fine if he ran as one. Utah voters should know what they're voting for, and he should be honest about who he is. If you pay any attention at all to McMullen's last 3 years in, quote, public life, it's very obvious. In 2020, he endorsed Joe Biden because he cares about Republican values. Watch.
For many, choosing between these two Americas will require us to do something we've never done before: crossing party lines to support a unifying presidential candidate of another party. I believe Joe to be an honorable patriot who's loyal to the Republic, and that's why I plan to put country over party, and in November, cast my vote for Joe.
He's putting country over party by voting for Joe Biden, who not one time in his entire life has put country over party. So after endorsing Biden for office, and again, lots of people did, that's okay, don't call it independent, Evan McMullen did not act independently. Just the opposite. He proceeded to crib his personal opinions directly from Karine Jean-Pierre and the other geniuses in the White House PR office. There isn't a stupid Democratic buzz phrase he didn't use and then overuse again and again and again. We can give you a million examples. Here's one. Watch him accuse, quote, a majority of House Republicans of voting to overturn the election results.
And then to see that violent, that deadly insurrection happen that threatened our democracy, and then to watch a majority of House Republicans still vote to overturn the results of the election. All of that just describes, of course, a party that is sick, that is rotten to the core.
Okay, so he's an MSNBC contributor. I mean, that's what he is. And if the voters of Utah want to elect one, they should just elect Joy Reid. At least she's not pretending to be something that she's not. And she's also probably a little smarter than Evan McMullen. No one voted to overturn the results of the election, actually, not a majority of House Republicans. What happened is that Republicans did exactly what Democrats did in 1969, in 2001, in 2005, and 2017. Republicans objected to the certification of the results pending an audit. That's what actually happened. We watched. But McMullen doesn't mention 1969, 2001, 2005, or 2017 because he's just repeating talking points he gets from his handlers in the Democratic Party. And he's been doing this for years. Here he is accusing millions of Republican voters of racism.
There's a taboo within the Republican Party about attacking racism in America. And I know that that's the case because when you do it as a conservative, you get attacked by elements within the party. There is an element of the Republican base that is racist.
Yeah, there's a huge taboo in America against opposing racism. We've organized the entire society on a bipartisan basis to oppose racism. But somehow Evan McMullen's the only man brave enough to oppose racism in public. He's also against polio and car crashes. The guy's a moron. But he's false. There are a lot of morons in politics. He's probably not the stupidest person in politics. Mazie Hirono still serves in the Senate. But he's a fraud. If he reminds you of anyone else, a guy pretending to be a Republican so he can undermine his own voters once he gets in office, actually sounds a little bit like Mitt Romney, the other senator from Utah. In a recent debate with Mike Lee, McMullen just came out and said it. Watch.
Senator Romney has worked hard and consistently over the past 3 years. I think it's important. He works with Republicans and Democrats, Senator Lee, to deliver for Utah. And he voted in favor of the bipartisan infrastructure bill that you voted against.
Right. So look, if voters in Utah want to elect a liberal Democrat, if they want to elect another Pete Buttigieg, and if they think that Pete Buttigieg's politics or Evan McMullen's politics represent the politics of the families of Utah, then go ahead and do it. But don't lie. Be transparent. Say who you are. You are a liberal Democrat. So that's the update from Utah. We want to go to New York, where something equally surprising is happening. Something surprising in a good way. So New York is an overwhelmingly Democratic state. No Republican is going to get elected governor of New York, obviously. But this year, a Republican looks like he may be elected governor of New York. Congressman Lee Zeldin is running against Kathy Hochul. She is currently the governor of New York. She's never been elected. She was appointed after they threw the old guy out for some kind of sex crime that no one ever really explained. Hochul has done a lot to make the state even worse, particularly New York City, which is now dirtier and more dangerous than a lot of third world cities, much dirtier and much more dangerous. This year in New York City, robberies are up 34%, felony assaults are up 14%, grand larceny 40%, motor vehicle theft 36%. Murders in the subway system are as high as they've been in a quarter century. So that's the population center of the state that Kathy Hochul runs. Now, before you say, well, maybe she's not responsible for all this, of course she's not responsible for all of it, but she's responsible for the change that made the worst crimes possible, and that would be New York's so-called bail reform law. That law lets criminals out on the street immediately, and Kathy Hochul supports it. Why does she support that? We're not sure, because she will not debate Lee Zeldin. So what is she spending her time doing? Improving New York? Cleaning up the Calcutta-like encampments in Midtown? Actually, they're far worse than anything in Calcutta right now. No, she's not doing anything to make the state better. Instead, she's dividing it and attacking people who are, quote, unvaccinated. Watch this.
I wear my vaccinated necklace all the time to say I'm vaccinated. All of you. Yes, I know you're vaccinated. You're the smart ones, but you know there's people out there who aren't listening to God and what God wants. You know this. You know who they are. I need you to be my apostles. I need you to go out and talk about it and say, we owe this to each other. We love each other. Jesus taught us to love one another. And how do you show that love? But to care about each other enough to say, please get vaccinated because I love you. I want you to live.
This woman's a joke. She's an embarrassment. That might be the most embarrassing tape ever shot of a sitting governor, even an unelected governor. And the truth is, it has done nothing. Sermons like that have done nothing to improve the condition of New York, not in the city and not upstate. And that's why people are leaving New York by the thousands for Florida and Texas and Tennessee. Why? Because it's too expensive, it's too dirty, and above all, it's too dangerous. People are getting hurt by crime. That includes her political opponent, by the way, Lee Zeldin, whose life intersected with crime earlier this year. Someone attacked him during a campaign event. And earlier this month, a gunman opened fire outside his home on Long Island. Watch this.
A gunman opened fire outside the family's Long Island home.
Grazed here, and then the bullet was found right here.
The congressman and his wife were away campaigning, but his daughters were in the kitchen when they heard gunfire. They hid in the bathroom and called for help. Two 17-year-olds outside were shot and took cover in the front yard. The shooter got away. Police say it was a drive-by shooting, not linked to the Zeldins, except for the random location perilously close to where they live.
Yeah, it wasn't linked to them. It could have been anybody. That's kind of the point. Living in New York now is dangerous. That state needs new leadership, and it looks like it's about to get it. As we told you, Lee Zeldin is running for governor. A new poll today, an independent coefficient survey, shows Zeldin leading the incumbent in the race for the first time. Congressman Lee Zeldin joins us now. Congressman, thank you so much for coming on. It's pretty remarkable, not that we didn't have faith in you as a person, but I mean, it's an overwhelmingly Democratic state, and you're now winning the governor's race. First, congratulations. Second, what do you attribute this to?
I mean, you have a governor who's just not doing a good job. She's unlikable. She's corrupt. She's pandering to criminals. She's pandering to tax and spend liberals. She's advancing woke policies as opposed to just focusing on what is most important to New York voters. If she was tackling rising crime, if she was tackling skyrocketing costs, then this might be a different campaign. But here we are talking about how we need to remove district attorneys when they refuse to enforce the law. We don't have recall elections in New York, but the governor does have the constitutional authority to get rid of a DA who refuses to do their job. We're over here talking about the need to get rid of cashless bail and some of these other pro-criminal laws, and we need to support our men and women in law enforcement who are being hung out to dry, getting the handcuffs thrown on them as opposed to putting the handcuffs on criminals. We have a state ban on the safe extraction of natural gas, and now Kathy Hochul wants to get rid of all gas-powered vehicles here over the course of the next decade. We just had the new CDC guidance come out where they're adding the COVID vaccine into their list, and you have a governor who is talking about as a possible consideration. Her past remarks have indicated that maybe she would mandate that for kids, but we already have it being required on college students, and we have people who are getting fired for their refusal to get the COVID vaccine, like our healthcare workers who used to be hailed as heroes, now treated as zeros. I'm somebody who believes that there should be no COVID vaccine on anyone, whether it's grade school, higher ed, employment, or otherwise, and everyone who should be who was fired should be getting their jobs back with back pay. So the contrast is clear, and even Democrats and independents are saying, you know what, we have to go a new direction in order to save this state. Kathy Hochul has to go, and she will on November 8th.
It sounds like she will. It's just a remarkable story. It kind of comes out of nowhere because, again, it's so overwhelmingly Democratic. It almost seems like she's trying to wreck the state.
Where we are out here campaigning our tails off to earn the support of voters to do our part to save the state, Kathy Hochul right now is crawling across the finish line. She's trying to survive this campaign, and clearly her goal here is to save Kathy Hochul. And the average voter out there in New York hitting their breaking point in the state. Listen, there's a reason why New York leads the entire nation in population loss, Tucker. And I don't even think that Kathy Hochul can finish this sentence that New York leads the entire nation in population loss because. And if you can't finish that sentence, no one's going to ever expect you to actually fix this. And a lot of people pick up on it.
So nicely put. Wow. Congratulations, Congressman Lee Zeldin of New York. Hopefully the next governor. Looks like you will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Tug.
Steve Bannon committed no crimes on January 6th. He was, however, Donald Trump's chief political advisor, and effectively for that, he was just sentenced to prison for refusing to comply with the January 6th committee. Steve Bannon joins us for his first interview since that sentencing. That's next. Steve Bannon had nothing to do with January 6th. He wasn't there. He committed no crime. But that didn't stop the January 6th committee from trying to destroy him anyway. Today, Bannon was sentenced to 4 months in federal prison at the request of that committee. As Congressman Matt Gaetz has pointed out, the Department of Justice official who prosecuted Steve Bannon, a man called Matthew Graves, is a partisan Democrat. He was on Joe Biden's domestic policy committee in the 2020 campaign and worked for other Democratic campaigns. So what we're seeing clearly is the corruption of the rule of law. Congress held Lois Lerner and Eric Holder in contempt famously, but of course they never spent a day in jail, and they were never going to because they were faithful Democrats. Tonight, Steve Bannon joins us for his first interview since his sentencing. Steve Bannon, thanks so much for coming on tonight. Do you agree with Matt Gaetz that this is partisan?
Oh, it's 100%. I mean, the whole Justice Department under Merrick Garland has become radically partisan, and I think that's after we win on November 8th to deliver this crushing blow against the Democratic Party, this regime. Tucker, I strongly believe you'll see Merrick Garland impeached next year by the new Congress.
I certainly hope so. People who say 4 months in prison is not a big deal had never been to a prison. It is a big deal. How are you going to respond to this? Do you plan to submit?
Well, number one, we have the judge laid out today a number of areas of appeal. I've got a great legal team. My legal team's working on the appeals right now. We've got appeals on use of attorney, separation of powers, executive privilege, the structure of the January 6th committee. So we've got a lot of appeals. They'll work through the appeals process, and so this is all my sentencing is all pending the appeals process, and we'll work through it. Like I said on your show the first time. At the end of the day, I got to go to prison by this illegitimate regime. Hey, I respect what the judge did today. I'm prepared to do it, but we got a long appeals process.
What do you think this says about our system more broadly, however? I mean, you're saying that you're being sent to prison because you advised Donald Trump politically. I mean, that doesn't sound like a free country where something like that could happen.
It's not free right now. You see this in whether it's the FBI rolling up individuals praying in front of abortion centers or designating parents, going to parents' rights at school board meetings for parents' rights as domestic terrorists. The Justice Department is completely and totally out of control, and the FBI is out of control. That's why I'm a big believer in defund the FBI. Use the appropriations process to defund both these apparatuses until they come to the table and we start cleaning up the rat's nest. I think the only way you're going to do it is you got to start at the top. We got to impeach Wray and we got to impeach Merrick Garland after full investigations. I think Merrick Garland can be impeached on the southern border. I think he can impeach by what he's trying to do to these parents, the parents' rights movement. I think that Merrick Garland will be impeached next year by the new Congress.
One of the reasons that our system has become partisan and the rule of law is evaporating is because no one's pushing back against it. Are you satisfied with the response from elected Republicans to what's happened to you? Is anyone sticking up for you, do you think?
I think it's fine. And look, elected Republicans, what they need to do now is focus on the 8th of November. Tucker, there's no substitute for victory. We have a very good opportunity here to shatter the Democratic Party as a national political institution, from school boards to state legislatures to attorney general, secretaries of state, to take the House by 40 or 50 seats and maybe take the Senate by 4 or 5 seats. To me, elected officials right now should just focus on winning and winning with at the biggest wave we can. I can do this myself with my lawyers. I don't need Republicans to have my back. What I want Republicans to do is, in the new Congress, is to focus on cleaning out the rat's nest at DOJ and cleaning out the rat's nest of the FBI.
If you're Lois Lerner or you're Eric Holder, both of whom committed, from my read, actual crimes against the country, unlike you have not been accused even of doing that, and both of them skated on contempt charges, do you think they're ashamed? Do they see the double standard? Has either one reached out to you to commiserate with you? I'm serious, like on a human level.
No. Look, as you know, the city is so partisan. This process now is so partisan, and they are some of the most partisan people, especially Eric Holder. Eric Holder is the hatchet man for Obama. So, no, they did. And by the way, I wouldn't want him to. Right now, hey, this is an unbridgeable gap. You have the Republicans and the MAGA forces on one side. You have these radical Democrats on another. You see, this is not rule of law. It's like a banana republic. You can't compromise in this. There's no substitute for victory. We have to win massively on the 8th, and then this new Congress has to really go and enforce the rule of law. And the way you enforce the rule of law is start serious investigations, not political, serious investigations, Tucker. And after those investigations, start bringing articles of impeachment and throw these bums out, whether it's Mayorkas at DHS or Garland at the Attorney General, and who knows where it ends.
Yeah, who knows where it ends is right. Steve Bannon, good luck. You don't seem worried. I'd be worried. If I were you. You're a brave man, and I appreciate your coming on. Thank you.
Not worried. Thanks, Tucker. Appreciate it.
So it's looking like Elon Musk will succeed in buying Twitter. Now, this is a huge problem for the Biden administration because Elon Musk has promised to stop censorship on Twitter, and censorship is the only thing that keeps the Democrats in power. So the administration has decided to use the federal government to destroy Elon Musk. Remarkable story. Details next. Increasingly likely that Elon Musk will soon own Twitter, maybe within the next week. And for the Biden administration, this is an existential problem. They cannot tolerate a free and open internet. Censorship is the only thing that allows neoliberal leaders to stay in power. They can't have a debate. They have to shut you down. And so the Biden administration is now finding ways to stop Elon Musk, not to argue against his position, but to crush him with the power of the federal government. They're not even pretending there's a legal basis for doing that. They don't have to. Bloomberg reports that, quote, Biden administration officials are discussing whether the U.S. should subject some of Musk's ventures to national security reviews, including the deal for Twitter and SpaceX's Starlink satellite network. On what grounds, you ask? Well, according to Bloomberg, quote, U.S. officials have grown uncomfortable over Musk's recent threat to stop supplying the Starlink satellite service to Ukraine, for free, by the way. They're also concerned by his plans to buy Twitter with a group of foreign investors, end quote. Oh, foreign investors. Every publicly held company in this nation is owned in part by foreign investors. Every single one. And of course, thousands, tens of thousands of acres of U.S. farmland are owned by the Communist Chinese government. But because apparently Elon Musk plans to form some sort of partnership with, quote, foreign investors, maybe the Saudis, he needs a national security review. Don't fall for it. This is about censorship and Elon Musk's promise to end censorship, which is the single worst thing that could happen to the Biden administration, to the Democratic Party, and to the people currently running the country into the ground. They can't have free speech. So on the campaign trail, as you well know, Joe Biden promised to end fossil fuels. Once he took office, he made good on that promise. He canceled oil and gas leases. He shut down a major pipeline. Apparently, the U.S. government helped blow up the pipeline from Russia to Western Europe. I mean, they did. And yet, on Wednesday, Biden insisted that the cost of energy, the rise in it, the unprecedented rise in it, has nothing to do with him. Here's who he blamed.
Because of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, the price of oil and gas increased dramatically. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is more than half full, with about 400 million barrels of oil. That's more than enough for any emergency drawdown. My message to the American energy companies is this: you should not be using your profits to buy back stock or for dividends. Not now, not while a war is raging. You should be using these record-breaking profits to increase production and refining. Invest in America for the American people. Bring down the price you charge at the pump to reflect what you pay for the product. And the American people will catch a break they deserve and get a fair price at the pump as well.
Well, there are so many lies in that script, we're not even going to attempt to reverse engineer it and correct them. Instead, a man much smarter than we, Victor Davis Hanson, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, joins us tonight. Professor, thank you for coming on. How do you assess the president's claims about energy?
It's very pathetic. He's trying to square a circle of two things that are incompatible. I mean, he came in here with this green religion, which is God is renewable energy and Satan is fossil fuel. So he canceled ANWR. He canceled Keystone. He didn't push the Constitution pipeline. He has fewer federal leases than any other president. He got his wish, Tucker. He got production down by 1.5, 2 million barrels, and scheduled increases he canceled. So he got everything he wanted. It was Stephen Chu, the energy secretary's dream. It was Barack Obama's dream when he said electricity would skyrocket as he canceled coal. And then guess what? Inflation came and there was a spike in demand, and the American middle class is being liquidated because they have to choose between food and fuel, and he wants to be reelected. But being reelected and destroying fossil fuels are incompatible. And the result is this, I guess you'd call it Orwellian paradox, where he goes around the world to the most illiberal regimes, Venezuela, Iran, even Russia before the war, and Saudi Arabia, and his message is, would you please pump this filthy, dirty fuel that we don't like, but we desperately need, and you can do it, but we won't. But you'll do it for our interests. And oh, by the way, we just called you a pariah. Or he goes to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and he thinks, well, I'm not actually pumping it out of the ground, which I can't do, so I'm pumping it the second time. So if you pump what's already been pumped in, I don't get blamed for it. The green people give me a pass. Or he goes to the oil companies and he thinks, well, yes, I wanted to put you out of business, and yes, I said you're greedy, and yes, I said you're price gouging, and yes, I cut back on your federal leases, but you owe it to me to get reelected to go out and start pumping more fuel that I don't want. And so it's so incoherent that the American people don't even want to attempt to try to understand it. They just don't want him anymore, and it's really hurt him. It's hurt us around the world, and remember, we impeached Donald Trump on the mere allegation that he used national security policy issues for his own political career or agenda. And what is Biden doing? He's dabbling with some of the worst regimes in the world against our national interest to pump a fuel that we have in abundance so that he will do better in the midterm. And I think the American people are furious about this to the extent they can understand it. It's so incoherent.
You got to give him some credit for chutzpah, though, in attacking energy producers for the shortage. I mean, please.
Shameless. He's very shameless, that's for sure. After
really
saying that these executives were sort of sinister creatures and price gougers and dabble in this filthy, dirty oil that's warming the planet, now he's saying you have a patriotic duty to ignore everything I've ever said on the campaign trail and pump more of it so I can get my guys reelected. That's the message.
It's unbelievable. Victor Davis Hanson, thank you for that explanation. So smart.
Thank you.
So it looks obvious the Republicans are going to do pretty well on November 8th, but that's not good enough, given how unimpressive so many Republicans are. The good news is that a lot of the Republicans who are going to be swept in on the crest of this wave are legitimately impressive. And one of the most impressive, Joe Kent of Washington State, joins us next. For the first time in memory, really, there are a lot, more than 2 or 3, legitimately impressive people, interesting people, people who think for themselves, people who pay attention to what's going on, people who listen to voters, people like that running for federal office in this cycle, and a lot of them are winning. Maybe not surprisingly, but still thrillingly. We spoke to one of them last night, Carrie Lake. We're going to speak to another one right now. Joe Kent is running for Congress from the state of Washington. He spent 20 years in the Army, and we're happy to have him join us now. Joe Kent, thanks so much for coming on. So it looks like, so you've never been in politics at all. You've never run for anything, as far as I know. You're running on a pretty different platform from the conventional Republican, and you seem to be winning. What about your message do you think is resonating with voters?
You know, Tucker, thanks so much for having me on. I think people are just really sick and tired of the same old establishment talking points. I got into this race because of the failings of our establishment. And when you go out and you actually engage with people and you listen to them, they tell you what affects them the most. And right now, it's inflation, stealing a month of their wages. It's crime at their doorstep. It's their children being sexualized in the classrooms with this perverted ideology. And they frankly had enough, and they want to hear that people are going to listen to them and actually go and fight. I've had a lot of money thrown at me by really both sides of the aisle, and it hasn't been able to take me down because I'm actually going out there and connecting with voters.
Man, they really wanted to stop you. Both sides did. But I wonder why. What you're saying does not sound radical at all to my ears. It sounds very moderate and sensible. Just respond to the basic concerns of voters. Why is that such a threat to so many people?
There's just a narrative right now from our establishment, from this regime of Joe Biden, but then also the entrenched political establishment that really wants the status quo. They want to fight endless wars. We're seeing that with Ukraine. They're willing to risk a nuclear war. They also want our jobs shipped overseas, and they love these open borders. They love the fact that there's essentially anarcho-tyranny in this country right now. And they don't want people who are going to think for themselves and who have an idea of how the system works from the inside. I worked in the military. I worked in the intelligence community. I know the games that these people are running, and I'm going to go to D.C. and stop them.
You do know the games they're running. Maybe that's it. You understand how the system works. But shouldn't they just say that instead of trying to call you some kind of extremist? Again, if you're an extremist, you probably wouldn't have been allowed to carry a gun in the military for 20 years, no?
Yeah, I was good enough to go and fight and die in their wars. I was good enough to hold a high security clearance and to go saddle up for them time and time again. But the second you want to say, hey, now I'm calling the shots, I've paid my dues, I want to help run this country, that's when they come after you. And that's the game. That's the way these people work. And we're just not going to tolerate it anymore. And I think the American people have had enough of that, and they don't even listen to this tired establishment anymore.
So you don't have to name names. I'm just interested. You've gotten a fair amount of publicity in this congressional race. Do you think there are a number of other Republican candidates running in this cycle who share your views?
I really do, Tucker. I think this is going to be a wave year, not just for Republicans, but for America First Republicans who are outsiders. We don't need this. This isn't the thing that we've always wanted to do with our lives, but we're stepping up away from private life, away from service in the military, because we legitimately care and we want to serve our country. I'm seeing that up and down the ballot here in the district, and I'm seeing that throughout the country. So I'm actually, as bad as things are in our nation right now, I'm very inspired and excited to be a part of this new political realignment.
Man, I hope you're right. Your race is certainly exciting. Joe Kent, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much, Tucker.
Hogan Gidley worked in the last White House as deputy press secretary. He's now with America First Policy Institute. He just had an investigation that found nearly 100 counties across 14 swing states failed to preserve voter data from the 2020 election. Now, that's a violation of federal law. What's worse is that in the few counties studied that did manage to keep their election data, there were discrepancies between the number of people voting and the number of ballots cast. Ooh, that sounds like fraud. Don't say it! You're undermining our democracy by pointing out it's not real. In Miami-Dade County, for example, there was nearly a 2% discrepancy between the number of people who voted and the number of ballots cast. That translates into a difference of more than 15,000 votes in one county. To give you an idea of how bad Miami-Dade's record keeping is, one of our producers, who has not lived in Miami for 15 years, just received a voter card to vote in Miami-Dade County in the upcoming midterm elections. Hogan Gidley joins us now to explain what else he found. This is an amazing story that I guess we're not allowed to talk about. We're going to anyway. Hogan, thanks for coming on. What'd you find?
Thank you so much, Tucker. Look, and the law they're violating is the Civil Rights Act of 1960, which requires these states to preserve and maintain these lists and voter data for 22 months after a federal election. And of course, we did go into these 14 states. We looked at these top most populated counties, 100 of them. Of the 100, only 6 managed to keep any data whatsoever. And it was egregious when we took a look at those numbers. But it gets worse because we also took a look at the numbers of voters who voted and compared that to the number of ballots cast. They didn't match anywhere. And when we asked the officials on the ground, they had no answers. It was absolutely ridiculous. You mentioned the 16,000 in Miami-Dade. That's one county in Florida. Does that matter in a state that big? Well, I don't know. Ask Rick Scott. He won his last election by 10,000 votes. Cobb County, Georgia, one county, we found 34,000 discrepancies. We know the last election there in 2020 was decided by 11,000 votes. You wouldn't let this happen at your bank. If you went in there and gave them $100, the deposit slip should come back and say 100. What if it said 50 or 150? These numbers don't match anywhere. No one can tell us why. This whole thing is a scam. And these laws are being violated across the country. These election officials either stupid, lazy, ignorant, or malicious, and they're violating federal law. It's a serious problem out there, and we have to fix it now. We're working with secretaries of state on the ground to make sure we can get to the bottom of this and make sure they maintain and retain this data for this upcoming federal election. It'd be so much easier to check up on it. Here's the big problem. Even worse, the person and entity that has to actually enforce the 1960 Civil Rights Act is Merrick Garland and the DOJ. Do you think they're going to take their eye off of trying to call parents terrorists for looking into their education of their own children? No way. We're looking for a path forward. We have to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. By retaining this data, we can take a look at things in real time and potentially prevent illegalities, irregularities, and fraud across this country from happening again.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine an excuse for, 94 out of 100 counties throwing away their voter data when they're not allowed to. I don't think there's a good explanation for that. Hogan Gidley, I appreciate that explanation. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Happy Monday. The good news stories just keep coming. Here's one of them. So when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade this past June, you remember this, Democrats howled in outrage. For weeks, every hour on MSNBC sounded like a plot summary from The Handmaid's Tale. Theocracy rising! They'll be burning witches! Liberals seemed genuinely upset, and probably most were, but on some level, not very deep beneath the surface, the people who run the Democratic Party weren't upset at all. They were thrilled. Here finally was an issue for them to run on in the midterm elections. It was an issue perfectly suited to a party that had nothing else to talk about. Are they going to brag about Joe Biden? I don't think so. So it was going to be abortion. They're going to take your abortions away. That was the Democratic message for the midterm elections, the ones that are coming up in just a few days. But there was a problem with the messaging. So COVID had just ended, and people, not being entirely stupid, still remembered that this very same Democratic Party, the same people, had forced the entire population to wear paper masks like children, and then to take the shot as a condition of going outside. So women have the right to control their own bodies? They used to tell us that. And then they fired thousands of nurses for refusing to submit to an experimental vaccine. So the phrase, my body, my choice, had been, as we say in the news business, overtaken by events. Clearly, Democrats needed a new slogan, a new way to talk about abortion. Unfortunately, nobody could think of one. Your body, my choice? No, that wouldn't work. It was too real. So in the end, liberals just dusted off the same old talking points and pretended like COVID never happened. Watch.
The midterm election is now less than 3 weeks away. And in the final stretch, I've noticed, and I don't know if you've noticed, frankly, this gaslighting of women voters. This message that says, oh, you don't really care about your right to control your own bodies, dears. It's the economy, stupid. You've got a media narrative that says that women don't really care about abortion, that women don't really mind if the states control their bodies. They don't care about that. They just care about the price of milk.
Yeah, it would be a shame if states got to control people's bodies, like telling people what to wear on their faces or what drugs they have to be injected with. That'd be like The Handmaid's Tale. Theocracy! Next, they'll be trying to control what you read on social media. Oh, wait. It's all pretty amusing. And the good news is that for once, lines this preposterous are not working. Abortion politics is a total fixation of Democratic donors. It's the main thing they care about. Why is that, by the way? It's a religion. It's a child sacrifice cult. But not everyone else feels that way, even Democrats. As the Daily Caller just reported, polls show that, quote, abortion is not a top priority for female voters. In fact, quote, most women support abortion limits that would have been considered unconstitutional under the Roe v. Wade precedent. Oh, so it looks like yelling about abortion is definitely not going to be enough to keep Democrats in control of the Congress. Are you surprised by that? No, of course not. You live here. So how did the highly paid and admittedly pretty smart strategists who figure out what the issues are in the Democratic Party so misjudge this one? Well, they did what a lot of us do. They forgot that not everyone is like them. Not everyone in America is as miserable as they are. In fact, there are still plenty of people in this country, believe it or not, who have happy marriages. There are still people who love their kids and their grandchildren. Still people who consider babies a blessing, not just an obstacle to better vacation. Now, some of those people, maybe a lot of those people, might still consider themselves, quote, pro-choice, but they're hardly pro-abortion. They don't think abortion is a positive good. It's not. They don't consider it liberation. And they definitely don't see abortion, as Janet Yellen recently claimed, as the answer to our national economic problems. She said that. So here's how it works. Janet Yellen gets rich giving speeches to the companies she regulates. That's corruption, but she's never charged. She's still free. In fact, she's the Treasury Secretary. And you get poorer. But we have a solution. You just need to have more abortions. That's what she said. That's the message they're selling. And maybe not surprisingly, it doesn't work. That's not what voters want. So what do voters want? What do they care about? Well, if you look at the polls, they care about exactly what you'd expect them to care about, which is the quality of their own lives. So they care about the economy, and they care about crime. This is very obvious. You don't even need to look at polling to know it, but every poll shows it with maximum clarity. So how do the media respond to this? Well, of course, doing their job. They've done everything possible to minimize both issues, the economy and crime. They've told us the economy is not in a recession. No, it's not. When, of course, by every measure, it is very much in a recession. And on crime, they've told you don't even talk about it. Only racists worry about crime. Racists, the one thing you don't want to be called. So how should Republicans respond to that? Well, we have video evidence. Here's Carrie Lake, who's running for governor in Arizona, deftly swatting away a reporter's claim that somehow people of color like crime. Watch this.
A lot of people of color feel like they're
A lot of
unfairly
people
targeted.
of color. A lot of people of color. How many people of color have you talked to about that?
I mean, if you look at surveys,
Which surveys? I'm happy to look at those stats because I will tell you this: that I talk to people of color. I talk to all Arizonans. They're all concerned about the crime. Just because your skin isn't the same color as yours doesn't mean you want your kids to be walking down the street in an unsafe neighborhood. Every Arizonan wants safety and security in their neighborhood. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. And if you look at stats, you will look and see that police do not target people of color. That is a lie that's been perpetuated by the left and then spread and disseminated and respread in the media. Check the stats.
It's so great. So the reporter says, well, people of color are concerned about your crime policies. Because, of course, being a white liberal, all white liberals know, if they know one thing, that they have a right to speak for, quote, people of color. Not to people of color, something they rarely do, but for, on behalf of people of color. So Carrie Lake just stops right there. Really? What people of color have you talked to? Republicans, all Republicans running for office should watch that video. But in the end, you don't need to convince people that crime is real because they live here too. Crime is everywhere. In New York, crime on public transit is up more than 40%. And not just pickpocketing. Now, this video that we're about to show you is not an aberration necessarily. It just so happens this was caught on tape. But this is exactly the reason that people are afraid to ride the subway. This weekend, a man was pushed onto the tracks. You can guess the motive, actually, from watching this video. But we know with no warning whatsoever. Here it is.
32-year-old David Martin is afraid for his safety after this random attack. He's in physical and emotional pain as he continues to replay this horrifying moment caught on camera over and over again. In this video, you can see that guy in the yellow hoodie shove him right onto the subway tracks. He zeroed in on the innocent commuter and then charged right at him. Martin ended up in the hospital, just grateful to be alive.
Oh, this random attack. There are a lot of random attacks on the internet, you may have noticed. Are they random? Really? The person who did that is not being sought as a hate criminal. You wonder why. But the point is, those kinds of attacks didn't used to happen. Now they're commonplace enough that you may no longer be shocked by them. But if you live there, you stay off the subway as a result. Crime in Philadelphia is completely out of control. For example, last year, Philadelphia recorded 562 murders. That is the highest homicide total since 1960. That happens to be the year the city started tracking homicide data. This year in Philadelphia, crimes like robbery with a gun are up 47%. Now, why is this happening? It's not an accident. None of this is an accident. Crime is rising as a direct result of policies designed to make crime rise. And at the same time, any effort by normal people, middle-class people, to defend themselves is immediately met with the full ferocity of the state. So this is an attempt, of course, to destroy the American middle class. Let's just be honest about it. This is crime with a purpose. They don't want to have this conversation, the people who did this, and that's why they attack you personally and morally if you bring it up. So in Philadelphia, a lot of these crimes can be traced to one man, Soros-backed DA Larry Krasner. He's decided not to charge many robbers with crimes. Arrests and charges for retail theft in Philadelphia have dropped by about 70% over the past 4 years. In that same period, reports of robberies jumped more than 20%. You see how this works? If you stop charging people with certain crimes, they commit more of them. That seems like an obvious observation. And again, it's more evidence this is not an accident. Larry Krasner is not an idiot. None of these people are stupid. They're doing this on purpose. They're trying to destroy. Now, why are they doing that? Well, we can't guess as to motive, but they're definitely doing it. So when asked about this, how does Larry Krasner respond? Shut up, racist! Watch.
We're just looking at Philly right now in a superheated election cycle where part of the Republican playbook, as you well know, is to point a finger at large, diverse cities and say large, diverse cities are lawless. What we see here is the same old playbook, which is about coded and racist messaging. It's about blaming the biggest city in Pennsylvania with the most diverse population for having the same national struggle that we have with gun violence everywhere.
Oh, diversity, racism, diversity, racism. Shut up, shut up, shut up. So here you have another white liberal deputizing himself to speak for people of color against his political opponents. Have you figured out how this works? You getting tired of it yet? Voters are getting very tired of this. So tired of it that even some Democrats have started to figure out, actually, maybe voters don't want to be shot, raped, or carjacked, and then attacked morally if they don't like it. Kathy Hochul, who is in part responsible for the rising crime in New York, is now running last-ditch ads promising to fight crime. Oh, really, Kathy Hochul? But it's probably too late for her. She's losing to a Republican in New York. Pennsylvania is almost as Democratic as New York is, but the lieutenant governor now running for Senate there, John Fetterman, is also losing for the same reasons, we guess. His challenger is Dr. Mehmet Oz, who joins us tonight. Dr. Oz, thank you very much for coming on.
Good to be here.
In the case of Fetterman, since he is currently an office holder, he can be traced to very specific policies that have increased violent crime in the state of Pennsylvania. Did they not think that anyone was going to notice that when they put this man up for office?
Well, it's shocking when you hear Krasner speak there about a city he thinks he's protecting. But I've been in Philadelphia a lot during this campaign. I live in Philly. I went to school in West Philly. And if you actually talk to the people there, what they say is they don't want to be part of a white woke experiment, a social experiment where they're left with the consequences. And Fetterman, to your point, said that if he had a magic wand to do anything he wanted to, his goal would be to release murderers from life in prison. Now, Tucker, can you imagine having a magic wand to do anything you want? I mean, you could take care of inflation, although you don't need a magic wand for that. But there's lots of things you could do. But releasing murderers from life in prison without asking the families what they think, and oftentimes voting against the other members of the parole board, even other Democrats, is not aligned with the values of Pennsylvanians. Yet that's the position he has taken.
So many Pennsylvanians have died of fentanyl OD and opioid more broadly, but fentanyl, I would say specifically in the last year, that it really is, the numbers are almost beyond belief. And yet, I don't think stopping fentanyl importation, dealing, punishing fentanyl peddlers is a feature of any Democratic campaign. Why is that?
Because they're ignoring the humanitarian crisis they have created with feckless policies on the border. They've funded cartels inadvertently who make money trafficking human beings, take the money, buy fentanyl from China. We don't say anything to China about that, by the way. The fentanyl was brought to America like pieces of candy and unfortunately ends up in people's mailboxes. But Fetterman goes beyond that. That's what all the Democrats do. Fetterman says, I want to legalize all drugs. I want heroin injection sites. And he actually embraced a measure in Oregon, which was enacted 2 years ago with exactly those rules. And listen carefully, this is critical. 40% increase in overdose death rates. That's to be expected if you legalize all drugs. But here's the part that catches me. 50% increase in homicides. You create a lawless environment. Police aren't allowed to do their job, which is to confiscate narcotics. And this is the world that he's trying to create for us. And by the way, if you're bothered by this, and I was bothered enough to run against them, please go to droz.com and support me, because the Democratic Party doesn't even know this about him. They're just trying to get the 51st Senate seat. So they're pouring money into Pennsylvania. So droz.com will at least give me some support against them. But we're going to win on the issues. Just like all the Republicans that you've mentioned today, the debate we're having tomorrow night is going to reinforce John Fetterman's radical positions. The momentum we have is a direct response of focusing on kitchen table issues. Crime, drugs, we mentioned both with the border, and of course the economy, everyone's focused on. Although if you're in Philadelphia right now, you're worried about your life, and companies are leaving, big chains leaving the city because they're done with the experiment.
I got to just ask you, and I'm sure you don't like to go to motive, but it's amazing to me. 107,000 Americans die of drug ODs last year, and here's a guy promoting drug legalization when we know it will result in more deaths. Why would anyone push an idea like that at a time like this?
Because they're more concerned about the perpetrator or the criminal than the innocent and the victims. They don't hear the stories that I've been witnessing as I campaign of moms telling me that they've found their children blue and dead because they went on Facebook and signed up for a over-the-counter pain pill and it ended up having fentanyl in it. We confiscated 7 times more fentanyl in Pennsylvania this quarter than 2 years ago, according to the State Patrol. And by the way, and all the law enforcement groups have endorsed me because they know Fetterman doesn't have their back, and I'll fight hard to let them do their job. But Tucker, that's part of the problem. When you talk to the left-leaning politicians, on the far left especially, they don't want the police to do their jobs. They don't want anyone to do their jobs. And they don't want to, therefore, deal with the consequences of it, so they don't come downtown to the prayer vigils I've attended. They haven't gone to Kensington, which is the largest open-air drug market in the country that we created with these bizarre beliefs that you can give people drugs and it's okay. Believe me, taking heroin long-term is not a good strategy. You're not going to do well. And because I know that and I love these people and I see the divine spark spark going out in their eyes. I want to take them to detox, put them in rehab, and I'll fund that when I'm in the Senate. Why wouldn't you want that? And again, this is something we should all be rooting for. This should be a bipartisan desire to make the country stable.
It's really stunning to me. And what's also stunning is I think you're going to win this Senate seat in a Democratic state because of the things you're saying right there. And I appreciate it. Dr. Oz, thank you.
God bless.
The National Black Caucus says its mission is to, quote, we read the website, ensure that African Americans and other marginalized communities in the U.S. have the opportunity to achieve the American dream. Okay, well, that sounds positive. But in fact, the Congressional Black Caucus is completely corrupt, as everyone who lives in Washington knows. But worse than that, it's just a political action committee designed to elect Democrats. They don't care about African Americans and marginalized communities, of course. And we know that for many reasons, but here's the latest. They are currently backing a white Democrat over Jennifer Ruth Green, who's running for Congress in Indiana. Jennifer Ruth Green joins us tonight. Jennifer Ruth Green, thanks so much for coming on. Now, you would think you're African American. The Congressional Black Caucus would be, I guess, on your side. It's a race-specific group, but why aren't they backing you?
Thank you very much for having me, Mr. Carlson. The hypocrisy in this decision is so incredibly clear. We see that this is about power, and this is about policy. This is about process. This is not about progress. These are the liberal elites who want to have power and are focused on retaining it. And so their decision to back my opponent is hypocritical at best. Because largely, when you think about the fact that I understand the black cultural experience better than any white man ever will, I understand the growth that needs to occur. I understand what needs to happen, and I'm committed as a black woman and as an Asian American woman to progressing minorities in our country. I seem like the very clear choice. But because they want power over politics, the hypocrisy continues to be loud and proud.
Well, maybe you know how corrupt they are. Maybe that's why they don't want to back you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
In our district, as I'm sitting in our district, we have a third of our people in Gary, Indiana, who are sub-poverty level. We have a third of the people in Gary, Indiana, who live in food deserts. And so here are people who are hurting. And so the economy that Congressman Frank Mervan has voted for has consistently put them in a place where they have to choose between gas and groceries, where Congressman Frank Mervan has voted for $3 trillion in spending and has spent their grandkids' money. And these are African Americans who are clearly hurting, and he has zero regard for them. And they are focused on trying, the CBC specifically, focused on trying to continue to elect him because overall they believe he's doing a good job. But I can just tell you this, Mr. Carlson, there is a line 1.5 miles long of cars that sit outside my headquarters. People who need to get to the food pantry, who need help. And this is the America that the Congressional Black Caucus wants to act as if it is helping black people, and it is very clearly not in Indiana's 1st Congressional District.
I've been to Gary, Indiana. It's one of the toughest places I've ever been in my life in this or any other country. It's overwhelmingly African American. It's really bad, I would say. What has the Democratic Party done for Gary, Indiana? Ever?
You know what? We have some amazing people that live in Gary, Indiana.
Yeah, I believe it.
I have some amazing friends, some people that love God, love others, want to serve both. And I am proud to have Gary, Indiana in our district. But when I think about the reality of people that are hurting because of these economic choices, this is a plan that has no action behind it. The congressman has no plan. But if you go to jrg.gop, you will see a plan to help figure out the economic processes that need to move forward. And I'm disappointed in the hypocrisy that the Congressional Black Caucus continues to provide because they don't have a plan and they would rather continue to crush people because it's all about, again, their power and the liberal elites versus regular America, people who want to stay in power, although they are doing absolutely nothing to make progress on the mission that they continue to talk about.
Well, of course. If they cared, they'd be talking about Gary, Indiana and not Ukraine. But they don't care. That's obvious. Jennifer Ruth Green, appreciate your coming on tonight. Good luck.
Thank you, sir.
So we pretty much stopped playing video of Joe Biden breaking down in public and saying bizarre things, garbled sentences. But the clip we're about to show you, we just could not resist because it's just too unbelievable. So stay tuned for that. Meanwhile, the media are casually preparing Americans for nuclear war like it's no big deal. You know, inflation, nuclear war, just the things a country faces. Really? We're going to give you an update on where we are in that war next. So if you're in the media and you sit down and interview a president in his first term, you don't typically ask you to run for re-election because they all do, because that's who they are. Running for election is the whole point of going into politics. And yet Biden sat down with MSNBC the other day and they asked him, are you going to run again? And the implication is maybe you've got such profound cognitive decline that you can't run again. And as if to prove that, in fact, yes, I'm completely demented, I'm a mannequin at this point, Joe Biden nodded off in the middle of the interview. We're not making this up. Watch.
I have not made that formal decision, but it's my intention. My intention to run again. And we have time to make that decision.
Dr. Biden is for it. Mr. President. Oh.
Dr. Biden thinks that, my wife thinks that we're doing something very important.
Whoa. He literally nodded out in the middle of an answer about whether he was running again. And right before he nodded out, he said, oh yeah, I'm probably going to run again. So take 3 steps back. Only a guy who was supremely confident in the effectiveness of voter fraud could do something like that. Because, like, he's not even trying. What? Huh? Yeah, I'm running again. Yeah, Dr. Biden. Oh, she's a doctor? Really? And then, because everything with Joe Biden can, in fact, get weirder, he blithely announced he could drop dead at any time. He actually said that. Watch this.
Am I slowing up? Am I don't have the same pace? Or, and that old joke, everybody talks about the new 70s, 50s, and all that stuff. It could be. I'm a great respecter of fate. I could get a disease tomorrow. I could, drop dead tomorrow.
Yeah, I could drop dead tomorrow. 81 million votes he got. 81 million without even campaigning from his basement in Delaware. He got 81 million votes. Shut up. You have to believe that or else you're an insurrectionist. It's like it's not even real. But it is real. Well, suddenly you're seeing a lot of stories about nuclear war. Well, we could have a nuclear war, not a big deal, just a nuclear war. I haven't had one in 80 years. Newsweek, for example, recently wrote a piece entitled, "These foods are essential for nuclear war survival in the United States." Oh, bet you don't think that when you're in Safeway. Which food should I buy for nuclear survival? Then Business Insider just reported, quote, 60 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, the nuclear dangers posed by the war in Ukraine are far worse, experts warn. Why is this not a headline in every paper every morning? At least a few Democrats seem a little concerned about this. According to the Washington Post, 30 House Democrats sent a letter to Biden urging him to shift his strategy on Ukraine and pursue direct negotiations with Russia. Well, yeah, but Liz Cheney, who loves wars because they make her feel powerful, remains completely unfazed about the prospect of, well, destruction of the world. Here she was yesterday.
The idea that somehow the party is now no longer going to support the Ukrainian people, which, for somebody who has a picture of Ronald Reagan on the wall of his office in the Capitol, the notion that now Kevin McCarthy is going to make himself the leader of the pro-Putin wing of my party is just a stunning thing. It's dangerous. He knows better. But the fact that he's willing to go down the path of suggesting that America will no longer stand for freedom, I think tells you he's willing to sacrifice everything for his own political gain.
Oh, yeah. The Ukrainian people, not some corrupt oligarch in a tracksuit. No, really, we're helping the Ukrainian people and making sure the war goes on as long as possible until we get to the point of nuclear war. Is anyone more loathsome than Liz Cheney? Meanwhile, let's put Americans in jail if they disagree. For some perspective on where we're going, we are honored tonight to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, who's a senior fellow at Defense Priorities. He joins us tonight. Daniel Davis, thanks so much for coming on. So the way that people are talking about the prospect of the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine, I never thought I would live to see people to sort of throw it out parenthetically. This is not the military you served, is it? People didn't just kind of say, oh, a nuclear war, no big deal.
No, in fact, when I was serving, it was at the highest of everyone's understanding that that's what we needed to avoid at all costs. And, you know, that's what the whole idea of mutually assured destruction was supposed to ensure that didn't, so that governments, whether it was, you know, the hated Soviets or you know, the United States, who were bitterly against each other, we all understood where you can't go. And so that kept everybody safe. But now then that seems to be we've lost that somehow. And the current administration, as I wrote about in 1945 a couple of days ago, they're pursuing a policy that logically can't be accomplished without putting us at grave risk of a nuclear war. Because they say on the one hand that we are going to help Ukraine no matter what it takes, as long as it takes. But then at the other hand, we understand that if that policy succeeded and Russia was actually in danger of being pushed out and defeated on the battlefield, then the chances that Vladimir Putin, out of desperation and fear, resorts to nuclear weapons is extremely high. Therefore, if Biden succeeded in that, our risk is higher, and we simply can't go down that path. There's nothing in Ukraine that's worth losing one American city.
What's so striking is that we're not having a national conversation about this because people like Liz Cheney, who, by the way, has never even been in a fist fight in her entire sad life, denounces anyone who asks questions about it as, quote, pro-Putin. Have you ever seen like this sort of zombie-like state the country's in, where we're moving toward this inexorably and no one's talking about it?
Yeah, you know what, I hear that all the time. Anybody who's talking about some kind of sane policy that keeps America safe, for some reason is talked about as being some sort of Putin apologist. But look, here's the thing. Our government is supposed to exist to make sure that our country is safe and secure and prosperous. And if we're pursuing policies that put that at risk, we need new policies. And I don't understand why people want to be against that. I do understand why they hate the Ukraine people being caught in this war, and I do too.
Yes,
I care more about the Ukraine people than most. But we have to end the war and prevent it from being escalated. That's our primary objective.
Yeah, of course. I mean, our primary objective of the U.S. government should be to help the United States, you would think. And I appreciate you reminding us of that. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis of Defense Priorities, thank you.
Thank you.
The new book, The President, the Freedom Fighter, now out in paperback. And he joins us tonight in the Friend Zone to assess. First of all, before we get to that MSNBC atrocity, congrats on your book coming out in paperback. Your books have done really well, all of them.
Right, and thank you very much. And to say that Brian Kilmeade, who's not stupid, it's the most unique introduction I've ever had, Tucker. And I've had a lot of unique introductions.
It was heartfelt, by the way.
On Fox and Friends. And that better not have been in the prompter, else I'm going to kill your writer, which is you, by the way. So I'm going to come back at you. No, but what I try to do, and I think it's just perfect with your sound bites. I am surprised they aired that, by the way. I mean, when you have that, they're like, you know what? I'm going to come back. There's a problem with the tape. I had problems sending it back to the office. I don't think we should really air this. But you know why? And what I tried to do in the paperbacks, you always try to add stuff. And when I add stuff, it's the news. They're trying to take down the statue of Lincoln that Frederick Douglass dedicated because Black Lives Matter. And they were trying to take down Frederick Douglass' statue. They ripped it off the pedestal because I guess America's a bad place. And what was so interesting, if you think about it, on January 6th, as I read that text and then watched it, is opposite day. For years, we watched Trump supporters get beat up. We watch Antifa destroy the place in masks. We watch Black Lives Matter wreck cities and attack cops. We've never seen that really from Trump supporters. And to see January 6th, I'm never going to soft pedal what happened. You don't either. I never would in a million years. But that was a bad day, horrific day. Where is the condemnation of all those other days that led up to that had everyone scratching their head going, am I watching this? Is this a Trump scene of them attacking the Capitol and law enforcement? And there seems to be a lot of questions there that still need to be answered, especially with the focus group that we just witnessed. But the first successful Democrat would say, I'm outraged about January 6th. You know what? I'm also outraged about what happened in New York City streets in the middle of a pandemic. You know what? I'm also outraged? I'm outraged that all these statues came down and they graffitied Andrew Jackson in front of the White House and had nooses around its neck. I'm outraged that they're taking Abraham Lincoln's name off a school. I'm outraged that they're tearing up our founding fathers because they didn't actually march in the same way we do in 2020, instead of judging people by the generations they lived in. I am outraged that they're ripping apart the foundation of the country and they're not happy as heck to be here while trying to make it better. I did not witness these riots trying to make the country better. And that's why I always will go back to history and say, what did they do during troubling times? They always seem to cherish the country. And even though they got violent in times in our past, and certainly a civil war is an example of that, they always said, glad to be here. Let's make it better. This is my vision. But we're the most successful multicultural country in the history of the planet, warts and all. And it's time to stop running from our past. And I don't ever, ever say January 6th is okay. But those people are trying to say, you never acknowledged the problems before. How dare you demand me condemn everything now?
Yeah, and stop lying to us and berating us, as if you occupy some position of moral authority. You don't. Brian Kilmeade, so nicely put. Right. Congratulations, by the way, on your book. Coming out in paperback.
Thank you.
Well worth it. Good to see you. More news just ahead.